Yes, thanks, Zena. I understand. But just to say, just shortly, not much, but just to say that we are thankful that this is happening and that we hope that this will take us to future discussions on the subject. So let me not chance it for another drop off and just say that hand over to you, Zena.
Thank you. So before we start, it'd be great to just find out who's in the room. So if you're able just to provide your name and the company or organization you're with and your interest in the CMOS industry. And so I'll start just by who I see on my screen. So Carlos, you are the first person on my screen. So if you'd just like to give a brief introduction.
Hi, I'm Carlos Lawrence from ASE Consultants. I have a background in production in remote indigenous environments. I was in the coffee business and then moved that into supply chain and group management and spent 8 years as chairman of a nonprofit doing remote agricultural development. And now I work with Adrienne Steele in food safety and food processing issues, including certification here in the US.
Thank you, Adrienne. Thank you, Carlos. Adrienne? You're on mute.
Sorry, always forget about that. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Zena, and having us. Adrienne Steele, ASE Consultants, and yes, Carlos and I are business partners, been in the industry for 22 years and have been business partners and had the business for 10. We focus on compliance, regulatory affairs, and food safety and quality, as well as systems and operational management and development in processing plants in wholesale manufacturing in the United States and abroad in Thailand. We've worked in many countries. So we have been working with many clients to help them realize their vision for their goals, from raw material supply to CPG. And that's my background. Is I'm a research and development chef and have a food safety and food science background. So that's what we're here to discuss and help you with whatever we can. Thank you so much.
Sean? If you could unmute.
Yeah, I'm currently listening from the UK. I've had an interest in CMOS for quite a long while now. I've got my founded company called Food for The, where I produce CMOS gel. I resell to local shops here in the UK. So any information regarding CMOS and supply up here to the UK is quite important to me.
Thank you, Sean. Tetsuya, Mr. Marahara, apologies if I pronounced your name incorrectly.
Hi, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm joining from the Fisheries Department in St Lucia. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, great. My name is Tetsuya Miyahara, the expert of JICA Fisheries Project for the Caribbean region, known as the Coast Fish Project. The Coast Fish Project has been implementing various pilot projects in each Caribbean nation. And I am working for a CMOS cultivation project in Prague. My expertise is CMOS cultivation and statistics. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you. Vaughan?
Good afternoon. I'm Vaughan Seri. I head the aquaculture unit, and CMOS production is under my unit. Thank you.
Thank you, Vaughan. Dr. King?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Aurea King-Snapp, the Director of Agricultural Services. And CMOS is a very dear commodity for us. So I'm really happy to be here today.
Thank you so much. Sarita Williams?
Hello, good morning. Morning, everyone. I'm Sarita Williams-Peter, the Chief Fisheries Officer. I manage the Fisheries Department, which has a role in the development of the aquaculture and wild capture fisheries sectors.
Thank you. Jason?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Badal. I'm the program manager at Export St Lucia. And Export St Lucia is the export promotion agency of St Lucia, and we work very well with the CMOS industry in promoting exports through many different countries in the world.
Thank you. Diana?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Diana Joseph. I'm the program officer at the St Lucia National Conservation Fund.
Thank you. Lynch?
Good afternoon. My name is Lynch Favory. I'm the Senior Technical Specialist for Agriculture at the OECS Commission. One of our projects that I'm running, I'm just going to be starting up would be an initiative looking at the value chain, the CMOS value chain in 3 countries, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and Grenada. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kofi?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kofi Bempah. I'm an entrepreneur in the energy transition space. Our business covers renewable energy and also carbon credits. And we are developers of those type of projects: solar, wind, battery storage, biomass, and others. And on the carbon side, work on developing carbon sequestration projects across the world.
Thank you. Hannah is the last person.
Hi, good afternoon. I am Hannah Dupal-Rumin. I am the Chief Plant Research Officer in the Ministry of Agriculture. We conduct the duties of regulating trade, in trade, sorry. So we have been very much involved in facilitating the export of CMOS. So I'm happy to be here with you.
Great.
Just a second.
This is very exciting. We have so many great people on the call with such amazing expertise. And so really this is more of a discussion than a presentation. So, but we'll use the slides to really guide our conversation. So if there are any questions or points that people want to make, if we can, just to make sure that we don't talk over each other, use the raise hand facility on Zoom. And as I see the hand raised, I will indicate for you to be able to share with the rest of the group. But as I mentioned, we'll use the slide deck to really just talk through what we've been working on and what we're focused on in terms of myself, Adrienne, Carlos, and Kofi, in terms of how we came together to really look at the opportunity that exists to support sustainable development, but also the economic and commercial opportunity that CMOS presents for the wider global community. So my name is Zena Collins. I'm one half of a entrepreneur family who had identified CMOS as something that we were taking for our own personal health. I'm originally from the Caribbean region and worked in the region for 5 years as a management consultant and business developer with a Big 4 organization. So I was very familiar with various different projects, particularly economic development projects that were happening on the ground there. So when I moved to the US and I started to take CMOS for my own health, I recognized that there was a challenge with the supply chain and there weren't that many reputable brands in the store. And so was able to access a food accelerator program that provided the opportunity to develop a brand and to get it to market. So it opened up a whole can of worms, as you can imagine, where I realized that in order to make this business sustainable and to make it a fair trade and an organization that was aligned to the ESG goals, there were a number of experts we needed to work with in order to do that. And that's where the conversation with ASC consultants and also Kofi Bempah with 54 Carbon came in. And so we really wanted to figure out, how do we source CMOS responsibly and sustainably from the Caribbean region in a way that provides technical assistance, supports capacity building, does it in a way that's environmentally sustainable, potentially accesses alternative forms of financing for our project and the local region, and make sure that the CMOS is regulated and certified in a way that it will be approved to be able to be marketed and sold at large scale into the global marketplace. And so our explorations opened up conversations with people like Craig Henry, who I was extremely excited to meet, and shared a passion for understanding more about how we could create a global collaboration and network to be able to unlock a lot of the potential that we all know exists for the CMOS industry. So the brand that we developed, I also have a background in brand and marketing. And so it's really important to be able to create a brand that really spoke to how you market a brand at scale in the marketplace, and enabled us to have a brand promise that ran throughout the way that we started up our company, how we scaled it, and how we went to market. So doing all of the work up front in terms of identifying how to create scientifically safe, sustainable CMOS took us on this journey. As I said, it's a family business. It was a personal story where I had alopecia, and that's me on the left-hand side, and somebody had recommended I start to take CMOS. And so over a 12-month period, I started to see that it had an impact on my personal health and the health of my family as well. And that really was the genesis of our brand. One of the risks that we identified was there were other organizations that were selling CMOS, and they were not processing their CMOS in alignment with their local health authorities, and they were not FDA approved. So it's important that we went through all of the due diligence process, working with organizations like ASC consultants to look at how we avoided some of those pitfalls that other companies and organizations were facing. As I mentioned, it was really about building in and starting as we mean to continue the sustainable development goals and the values that we wanted our brand to represent as we build up the CMOS business, and make sure that we learn from other businesses that haven't done it in a sustainable way and now are having to rectify some of the impacts that they're having on the local lives in small island developing states and the wider environment. So I'll hand over to Carlos, who can give you some more information about the seaweed industry, which I'm sure you all also have a lot of information about. So I'd like to open up the discussion now and just hand over to Carlos to facilitate this part of the discussion.
So what we're looking here, let me turn my camera back on. The thing that came to mind, because I've worked in similar development projects, is finding a model for the development of the seaweed market to be able to find a reasonable goal, the guidelines and tools with which to develop it. Other projects similar to what you're trying to do have been done in Indonesia under programs that have access financing. So we know there's resources out there and specialization in this market. Other markets such as acai have faced the similar kind of issues, and we can look at how that market was developed and what resources brought it forward. Then, of course, my own experience in the coffee market, seeing the changes go through, where the project we originally worked on, we saw a 300% income in farmer, 300% increase in farmer income over the period of the project, and what kind of activities had the most effect on it. Because as noted from the slides and all the issues and certifications we've looked at, there are a lot of competing pressures and resources and activities you can be doing, but we want to focus on the ones that are going to get us to a reasonable, sustainable goal in a period of time that creates a return for the farmers, a return for investors, and a functioning process for the government and exporting agencies to manage that can come out of this. And so what we'll be doing basically is looking for resource models from other projects where we have experience, and then set a reasonable target on what we've seen in these industries. One of the things we've seen is that as you launch these with more and more shrinking world, more information resources and such, you can get a lot quicker response. The coffee industry, you know, it has 700 years of development, and still it's behind some other areas in the ability to distribute income equality and development, whereas acai has gone in 10, 15 years where coffee has gone in 700 years, still creating its own, although creating some returns, creating its own issues that you tend to see in quickly developing environments where people end up getting left behind, or environmental concerns that weren't well thought out were coming from. Looking at the amount of resources here, I think our real challenge is going to be identifying those that tie together, where are all the parties involved, including outside support like JICA, the government, and the agencies in charge of creating this development project are focused on one set of goals. And we don't have too many things in the mix that are overall complicated. We really want to work with what are the most effective tools at each level to get this product to market in a sustainable manner.
Before I pass over to Adrienne, are there any comments or questions based on what Carlos has said? Craig, you're on mute.
Carlos, I wonder if you could expand more on the acai experience, because I'm not sure that many folks are quite aware of what that product is and what the story is behind that.
So acai is a tropical fruit that was discovered by Southern California kind of surf community here about 15 to 20 years ago. I worked with some of the initial certification agencies that went into Brazil to certify this product and saw those challenges. I've literally been on donkey in some of these certification projects because there's both the physical access and the informational. Acai came in as mainly a beverage product in the early 2000s, was a huge hit, created demand. There are now acai bowls and many superfood uses for acai, and the industry grew within the development outside of its traditional natural growing bounds to become a competitive product in the natural environment, not on the level of palm oil, but running into similar issues, farmer health, environmental health. At what point does acai become it originally started as a wild harvested collective product, and it moved to being planted and developed as a commercial product, and how to make that transition was difficult to manage because of its natural and growing environment. So we're now dealing with the same issues you run into in long-term projects like coffee and palm oil, where having a plan at the growing end so the product can be sustainable matches the amount of market you create for it. And I think we'll run into this with seaweed as to how do we manage one of my first questions when I came into this product is, do we have a realistic assessment of what the production capability is in an environmentally sustainable manner? And I know we just had someone mention that they're actually going to be doing studies of production capability, but if you grow one end of the chain too fast, you put pressures on the other end that can possibly break the controls you have in place. So coming out with a good development plan, realistic growth, where can we use price incentives to restrain growth till the development of the production can keep up, and where can we use promotion to increase production so that we can have cost-effective facilities on the processing and on the farming side. That's kind of how acai relates. One of the things I would recommend is we basically do a base study of where are they at now, 15 years later, what has happened, how can we avoid those pitfalls?
I see Sarita Williams' hand is up. Sarita, please unmute.
Thank you, Zena. Thank you, Carlos, for so far the presentation. What I would perhaps just in terms of setting the context for the relationships between ASC consultants, and I noted the Humble Wives initiative. If I can just get some context of the relationships, and
Sure.
it would really help. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so just to set the context, so we launched Humble Kind Wise as a brand with the aim to create a consumer packaged good company as part of a food accelerator program that we became members of in DC. Because of my relationship with the Caribbean, it was very important to me to be able to source CMOS from the Caribbean region. One of the recommendations from the accelerator program was that we partner with experts in areas where we had gaps of knowledge, and we were introduced to ASC consultants as experts in the compliance and regulatory space, and then later learned of all of the other areas of expertise they had that was similar to what the type of insights that we needed to build the CMOS business in a sustainable way. The relationship with Kofi Bempah came about with identifying alternative sources of financing to support the sustainable development and building the projects in a sustainable way, where we potentially would be able to access funding and also make sure that we were able to identify ways to increase access to projects like carbon sequestration and carbon credits through the expertise of companies like 54 Carbon. So in conversation with ASC Consulting and 54 Carbon, we recognized that we had expertise along the whole supply chain, and that me as a client, essentially, accessing the consulting services of ASC Consultant and working with Kofi Bempah's company 54 Carbon meant that we would be able to achieve our brand promise goals of being the most scientifically safe and sustainable CMOS brand. And so, as I mentioned, because my background is in business development, marketing, and branding, it was very important for us to build a brand that we knew we'd be able to make it sustainable for the long term. So that's kind of the genesis of the relationship. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. Thanks.
No problem. So before I move on and pass over to Adrienne, just want to check if there were any other questions before we move on to the next. Over to you, Adrienne.
Thank you. So what we have identified in working with Zena and Charles is how we've talked a lot about how we might approach this project, how we might create sort of a collective farming organization and sort of look at all the development training and the food safety pieces that go along with this. So this is a 9-step grid that kind of leads us through. So we started with the consumer packaged goods, CPG. So we knew that we needed to do strategic development for this farming collective. And we also needed to set up a strategic supply chain for it. Then we understand that in order to do this and have this development in the CMOS industry, we also had to have the cross-functional and strategic partnerships to achieve goals, to make sure that we had that sustainability in the food chain and the supply chain, and also make sure we have a compliance and understanding along the way. So that's what brought us to understanding with CMOS how we might handle the farming process and how we might support the farming process by creating tools, training, and programs that would support sustainable and food safe ways of farming and drying. So we also have to understand the supplier flow requirements in terms of once you harvest, once you dry, once you have, where does it go? What are the requirements for distribution? In the actual process itself, very key food safety learnings are how can we dry responsibly? How can we harvest responsibly? How do we handle the look into the actual product and know all the components that might come out of it? So we have found the Aquaculture Stewardship Council and the Marine Stewardship Council, and we found accreditation programs that can support this endeavor. And they have laid out a standard with which we can achieve, and ASC would be supporting the organization by helping you to achieve the actual standard. So then we were able to get certification of the CMOS according to the standards, according to the regulatory requirements, and be in full compliance as we move it out into a distribution chain. So therefore, we understand the foreign supplier verification compliance, all of the quality assurance and quality control along the way, and importing into the United States and exporting out of wherever it's being harvested and developed. So therefore, then it could turn into, there's a couple different ways to handle it. We could do in country, or we could set up US operations, but there's a high value program. There is opportunity for this to become more food safe, more sustainable, and have a real support program with, like Carlos had said, with everybody understanding the directives, where we're headed, and then creating the collective so we have synergy between the groups in order to move forward with the understanding of the collective, what's needed, what's required, what programs we're going to use, what standard we're aligning to. And that's exactly how a GFSI program, the Global Food Safety Initiatives, are handled in the United States and throughout the world. There's many standards that align, and they create the rules with which we apply to every activity that the regulatory officials know what to look for and expect you to meet. So how do we meet those standards? So we're trying to provide that context by creating bite-sized pieces for you, for us, for the endeavor. So it is all about HACCP, hazard analysis, critical control point training, understanding what permits we need within the countries that it's being harvested and dried, what the collective farming management needs and requirements are in order to move the activity from one flow to the next, how we're drying, what we're monitoring, understanding all the pertinent pathogens, what we're testing, what is going to be required in order to understand on a certificate of analysis as it leaves and exports into the United States. Again, aligning to the practices that are established as per the standard with those two entities that I had just mentioned. So once it gets to the United States, so that was a growing group collective, right? That's what's really needed for export, the growing group collective, and then what's needed as a consumer packaged good for that product to be purchased by other people to put into their raw materials, like Sean in the UK. What's needed in order for him to put it safely into his product. So that product needs to be certified, and it needs to be understood by regulatory affairs, and that we're aligning to the US-based compliance programs under the Food Safety Modernization Act, the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, all supplier approvals, finished good testing and compliance that's required by the food safety standards that are applied here in the United States, such as GFSI programs like SQF or BRC.
Thank you, Adrienne. Are there any questions before we continue, or comments? Is this by, I guess, a show of hands, is this familiar information, or you could put in the chat, or is this information you're hearing for the first time? You're on mute, Charles. You're Craig.
No, I'm going to give others the opportunity to comment based on their respective.
It sounds like Sarita had said that it's familiar, but it's provided in a more concise way here, which is great. I mean, that's what we want to do, is sort of deduct it down so it's understood. Applying it to the standards is something, so how do we do that? And so as an organization, ASC has led many companies and groups through this endeavor, Carlos on his coffee side and working with indigenous communities, and me on the wholesale manufacturing side and understanding how to bring a team of people together to really align to a standard, create training protocol around that standard, write the documentation so that this can be done with an understanding of what we're trying to achieve. And then understanding how it's going to get out of the out and into the United States responsibly so that we can help the collective realize their goals of raw material supply for the world. Actually, it's not just the United States, it's also the world.
Thank you, Adrienne.
Thank you.
So just handing over to Kofi just to talk about the blue carbon credit component.
Sure, thanks, Zena. Just to kind of recap, my background is in developing energy transition projects on the belief that the energy transition should be equitable for all participants from all over the world. And so with that, I wanted to explain a little bit about how carbon offsets work. And the thing to bear in mind with carbon offsets is that you first really need to think about what a carbon footprint is. And so carbon footprints are essentially something that we all have a hand in creating. So in your daily life, you will create some type of carbon footprint or some greenhouse gas emission. If anyone has a car that's not electric, and even if it is electric, it may be that there is some form of emission being created through the production. But that helps to kind of set in context what this is all about. So all of these emissions are being created, and the emissions effectively go towards greenhouse gases, which in turn have a big impact on the temperature of the Earth. And the idea is that we need to bring the temperature down by 1.5 degrees by 2050 in order to meet climate goals. And so the carbon credits or the carbon offsets are a reverse of the idea of your carbon footprint. And so these are projects that are developed which either reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere or remove them entirely. And so the type of projects that we work on at 54 Carbon are around, so we're agnostic, which means that we do lots of different types of carbon sequestration projects, everything from reforestation to biodigesters to biochar, and now looking at the blue carbon economy as well. The good news about the CMOS venture is that CMOS is the type of product that helps to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. So by planting and expanding CMOS cultivation, you can reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, and in relation to that, you are able to generate a carbon credit. So what's the carbon credit all about? So the carbon credit is basically a tradable unit. So for every metric ton of CO2 that you remove from the atmosphere, you can achieve a credit, which can be sold to third parties. The type of companies that acquire these carbon credits are some of your typical household names, the Googles, Facebooks, some of the major oil and gas companies. And the idea is that most of these guys have ESG sensitivities, so they're trying to reduce the amount of carbon that they put into the atmosphere. And in addition to that, some of them are in locations where regulations provide that they have to meet certain goals in terms of their CO2 or net CO2 reduction. by certain times. And because of that, they need to reduce their carbon footprint of their businesses. And if they're not able to do that on their own, which typically they can't, then what they will do is they will buy carbon credits in order to offset their emissions. So that's really the idea behind the carbon credits. How do you actually get these credits? So there are some accredited agencies, for example, the Gold Standard and Vera. And what you will do is you'll submit a project to one of these agencies by picking a methodology. And once that methodology has been approved, you'll put in place some independent verification of the project, because you can't just say you're going to do something. You actually have to demonstrate that you're doing it in order to achieve the carbon credit. So once that independent verification has taken place and the accreditation agency is happy that the project meets the methodology parameters, then they will accredit you. And on that basis, you're awarded these carbon credits, which then can be monetized. So what 54 Carbon is doing is helping organizations to achieve carbon credits for some of the work that they do as a business or as an organization. And in addition to that, we are running our own projects where we effectively design, as we're doing in this case, for this venture, where we design a program to monetize the carbon credits. So what we have as a unique selling point is that we can bring financing in order for the projects to be implemented on the understanding that they will achieve the carbon credits because they fit the right criteria for them. And so that financing comes in, it allows the project to get up and running. And then once the project gets to a certain point in time, we can start applying to one of these credited agencies in order to achieve the carbon credits. So let me stop there in case anyone has any questions.
And just to ask again, is this information familiar? So Sarita, thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Kofi, for the presentation. Just again to kind of marry 54 Carbon in the context. Is it that we're is that the Humble Wise is looking at partnering with 54 Carbon to see how we can have like a climate adaptation stream or component to this? I'm sorry, I'm just kind of missing something missing for me in terms of bridging the relationship again. Thanks. And the information is familiar, yes.
Great, that's good news. So yeah, essentially it's a partnership with Humble Wise Kind, and the idea is to assist and add value to the CMOS venture by participating in one aspect which we consider to be quite a valuable aspect of the CMOS project. So yes, you can implement the CMOS venture and process and sell to market. But if you did just that, you'd be leaving a fundamental revenue stream off the table, which would be that you are reducing the CO2 in the atmosphere by implementing this project. So why not take the benefit of the upside that these carbon markets create? So the partnership is really to help Humble Wise Kind put together a program in order to take the full benefit of the activities on the CMOS cultivation. Sorry, Humble Kind Wise, I said it the other way around.
Thank you for that question, Sarita. And just to also just add, the purpose of this call today really is one of the things that we don't do enough of is knowledge sharing along the journey. And even though this is part of our development process in terms of as we're building and starting up the business, it's something that we see as valuable to have an open discussion around. And namely because the amount of supply that we potentially need based on what we see the market demand as, we don't think there's one island in the Caribbean that can supply that. It would have to potentially be a regional initiative. And what we've also discovered in terms of being on the ground in the US is that there are a number of risks in terms of scaling the business if we don't look at ways to support sustainability, compliance. And even though there are a number of people who are selling CMOS, those compliance issues haven't been met. And it's only because the FDA and other organizations are catching up. And so if we can share the knowledge now, we feel the market is big enough for, you know, lots of entrants. But we are just making sure that we choose the best path to make sure that we are doing it in a way that's most sustainable by being compliant and looking at all of the other financing opportunities that will benefit not just us, but the region that we're sourcing materials from, based on what you heard Carlos talk to earlier about his experience in similar adjacent industries. So if there are no other questions, I'll just continue, but please feel free to ask questions, or even if it's just comments that you have, please feel free to share that, because we know that there is a lot happening in St. Lucia, and you are actually, you know, way ahead of the CMOS game in comparison to some other islands in the region. So just last month, courtesy of ASC Consultants, I attended the Natural Products Expo in California, and it's the largest natural, organic and healthy product event in the world with over 100,000 attendees. And it not only helps you to see, gives you an opportunity to see the small brands that are coming up, it gives you an opportunity to see brands that were at the same stage that we are at that are now multi-million-dollar businesses. And so they have startups, scale-ups, and monopoly companies in this space there. And Adrienne and Carlos have been attending for the last 15 years. So they have seen how rapidly this organization has grown and how quickly this industry has grown. And what, as a new attendant to that event, I recognized was in being there in a couple of days, I was able to get access to knowledge that may have taken me years to acquire by being in the space where I had access to a number of workshops, would be able to speak to buyers from stores and people who were looking to get wholesale level of supply of goods. And so it really opened my eyes up to some of the trends that are in the marketplace at the moment. And one of the biggest trends that we saw was sustainability. And it's not just the companies are driving a desire to be more sustainable based on the fact that this is what the consumers are saying they're asking for. And particularly with a generational shift to millennials and Gen Z, who are now taking over as the largest occupiers of the workforce over baby boomers, and have grown up in an environment where climate change and the digital economy has just been part of their whole life. The way that they are consuming goods and are asking for companies to show up is very different than before. And so that, in alignment with the growth of natural products and also the need for any products that are launching at this stage to be value-based and meeting at least the basic requirements of doing good, fair traded business, that is part of the alignment with what we're doing. And we see the fact that it's something that we stand for anyway, but it just also happens to be in alignment with what's happening in the industry. at the event, there was also a presentation from Amazon. And Amazon, as you know, is one of the biggest retailers in the world. It has 197 million visits each month. And in the presentation, the marketers identified the top 9 ingredients that are currently being searched on their sites. And as you can see, one of those ingredients is CMOS. So if you think that there are 197 million people visiting Amazon's site each month, and the data that they're able to gather is some of the best data in the world, for CMOS to be identified as one of the top 9 products just shows you of the potential market demand that is out there for CMOS. And so hence our desire to make sure that if we are in that market, we are doing our part to make sure we're doing it in a sustainable way. So any questions to that before I hand over to Adrienne? I hope I'm not sending you all to sleep here. Sarita, thank you.
Hi, thanks so much, thanks so much for that, the previous slide. Can you go back to the previous slide, please?
Sure.
Not this one though, the one again, one of the, right, okay. So I noted about the sustainability options. I was wondering if ACS consultants had any prior experience. I know it's coffee, they may have been that, but I'm not sure what the status is now regarding like fair trade certifications, etc. Thanks.
Sure. Carlos, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I have worked on projects with both fair trade and another farm initiative called UTS, and we had clients in Thailand working with fair trade while we were doing the food safety portion at the same time. So I am kind of familiar with their standards, how they're set up. Choosing one for your industry has to do with whether or not they have experience in it. And there are not a lot with experience in the area of aquaculture and marine activities. So not that we wouldn't be able to get them, but to a certain extent, we would be teaching them. I feel like the Marine Stewardship Council, they have a farm support aspect to it, which covers some of the issues fair trade does. And I like the way they approach it. In doing international work with organic, I often found that there were 2 approaches to standards development. One was the ISO control point version, which can be difficult to implement in non-industrialized situations where you don't have a lot of access to information resources. And the other is more like the best model is the Indian Organic Standard. It's an intention standard, and I find the MSC standard to be along that line, where their goal is to get the farmers and the people that work with the farmers to do a better job and improve every year they have an audit, rather than hit extremely high baseline the first time. It makes it easier to work with them, the ability to develop internal standards to which you're trying to achieve, and the council or the standard manager is guiding you towards that and verifying you're doing what you say you're going to do. And that is always to the basic premises of any standard, whether you're helping farmers or doing food safety, there is what the standard says you have to do, and then there's what you say you're going to do. And I much prefer the standards and communicate to my clients, no matter which one they're on, is that you should focus on what you say you're going to do and develop standards that work for your model and your activity. So from there, that would be my recommendation is survey the standards, find out who works best, talk to, although it's not particularly a farm standard like Marine Stewardship Council, and see if we could work for us rather than bringing another one in. As I said when I first spoke, you know, we have a lot of expertise here. We have a lot of groups working with a lot of different things they'd like to achieve, but it can become overwhelming. So my goal would be to focus on the one that gets the sustainability throughout the supply chain the most as the priority before trying to get everything done at once, because there's a lot going on here. So from the fair trade or whatever kind of farm support standard, I would say we do a little shopping on that, but don't just stick to those that you know. Some of them were actually more effective in the standard writing, and they could use us to help them promote that standard.
So I just want to add to that ASC, one of the things that we do is manage certification programs for many brands across the world. So we handle the certifications for our Thai clients. We handle certifications for US clients. Some of our clients include 5 Organic, Health Aid Kombucha, Crave Jerky, things that have had a lot of different certifications between organic, non-GMO, GIFCO, gluten-free. So we manage we are like their outsourced certification agency. So we manage that for their brands. So just making sure that I address the specific question, Sarita, we have experience in the certifications. We understand those standards and are consistently achieving those on behalf of our clients and managing the program for them.
Does that answer your question, Sarita?
Oh, thanks. Thanks so much, Carlos and Adrienne. Adrienne.
Adrienne.
Yes,
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is great. My interest from the fair trade perspective was just trying to balance the social and the social and the environmental aspects. So just making sure that we can also capitalize an opportunity to look at certification where it's providing an opportunity to ensure that there are some type of standards regarding giving fair prices to the farmers that are in that partnership. I think that's where I was going with the fair trade. I think that's the only one I'm familiar with, but there may be others out there, as Carlos mentioned, and it would be good to see where their standards are. But it was just trying to also balance the environmental ones, which looks at GMO and climate and organic, etc., with the standards of maintaining people's social standards, if I can put it that way. So I think that would be good. And I just generally, I think having this conversation is great. It's a great opportunity for St. Lucia to benefit from, you know, an opportunity like this. So it's I think it's a step in the right direction for the sector. Thanks.
I just want to add, Sarita, and thank you so much, that all of the standards, whether they're going to be on your package or whether it's going to be a standard that we follow from food safety, at the ground level, we design and dedicate our efforts toward those standards so that as we are creating programs, it has all of those things in mind. So we would take the conversation that Carlos had said, we would collectively agree to what those standards that we're going to follow in terms of what initiatives are the most important for the endeavor. And then making sure that along the line, whatever those standards are, they are combined into one effort instead of thinking about it thinking about it up front instead of in hindsight. So that's what we're used to doing, especially if we're building or helping to build from ground up. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrienne. Thank you, Sarita. And just while we're on, talking about brands and the Natural Products Expo, I know we have a representative from Export St Lucia. Just interested to find out what the process currently is in terms of exporting CMOS products. Is there a large industry? Are there any barriers to it at the moment? If you're happy to share, it'd be great to hear a perspective.
Hello. Yes, there is actually a large industry. Over the past, I would say 5 to 6 years, CMOS exports have grown significantly from St. Lucia, starting off from roughly about $50,000 something US dollars in 2017-18 to well over 9 million in 2021-22. During the COVID period would have been the brunt of this, where you saw a lot of, there's a gravitation towards CMOS as people thought it was a natural system immune booster. So in terms of barriers, because of St. Lucia's position in most of the multilateral agreements, we do have market access to most of the countries that are considered priority to us. So as a result, you would see from our data that over 90% of our exports currently go to the United States, with the United Kingdom in the immediate second, and then Canada and some of the CARICOM countries. We've seen other countries such as Dubai, as far as the Netherlands, Sweden. Some of these countries have also registered interest, not with the same quantities as what happens with the US. So we do have market access. Some of the issues we do face are still in terms of certification. Some of the importers, and most of them now are asking for what you mentioned a while ago, which would be the certification of analysis, which most of our small entrepreneurs do not have access to. Even on a national level, we don't have the laboratories to produce this on a batch level. So a lot of this have to be tested by the importers, and most of them have shown that our CMOS qualities are very good. Apart from the market access conditions that you mentioned, one of the major concerns we have is that most of the CMOS exported is still done in the raw and dry form, which means that our suppliers and farmers are really still producing at the very bottom of the value chain. And what you saw in Amazon is really people who import this dry CMOS from St. Lucia and sell in value-added methods such as gels and capsules and other mixed where the value is a lot higher than what we receive here. So we've been trying to see how we could work with value-added processors. We've seen over, especially recovering from COVID, a number of young people have gone into CMOS production and CMOS value-added. Again, we do not have the necessary certifications for some of the entry requirements for those value-added products, which would require some level of manufacturing certification beyond just agricultural production. So there's quite a bit of work being done with getting that. The trade show you mentioned, there is one we actually plan to attend. And somehow, I do believe there was an issue where there was one on the east and one on the west. And there was an issue with our registration where they registered us for the wrong one and we didn't make it, but it would have been good for us to attend that trade show. But in terms of exports, the interest is still there. St. Lucia CMOS is still widely known globally. Without us branding it, it's known for its quality because of where it's grown, how it's grown, and it's considered to be the best in the world. Apart from this certification, my agency is also working with CARIPI to develop a GI for St. Lucia CMOS, a geographic indication that would sort of bring out this uniqueness to give it an even better name and sort of create a brand that would be known for quality that is from St. Lucia. So that's that in a nutshell. I hope that helps.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Adrienne, Carlos, have you anything to add to that?
Well, I think one of the, as you spoke to, one of the issues to look at is what conditions should it be leaving the island, and what kind of processing can we do to it to improve its ability to pass food inspection activities. We were discussing this just yesterday in preparation for this, is what would make it the most effective, particularly as part of your initiative for Caribbean Export Group, where you have multiple production sites, but you have the same import requirements from all these sites. Can we bring it together and do combined testing and create a processing activity that will add value, mainly through the process of adding security to it to get through the issues that some CMOS has had coming into the US with FDA approvals? Because it doesn't necessarily have to be just testing. We can work with the pre-processing activities to validate what they're doing. What is the proper water activity content? of a dried product before it's exported? And can we validate that so that you can issue a COA that says this is the water content level, and we validated that there won't be bacterial growth at that water content level. So yes, I agree. We should find, processing value-added activities that fit the role that'll best meet your consumer base. In some cases, it may be doing finished goods on site, but in many cases, it may just be shoring up pre-production issues for a wholesale value chain that makes your exporting easier, more acceptable, and creates a higher value product in the market because you have met all the food safety requirements. In the US here, it's called foreign supplier verification programs, where you have all the documentation and all the material you need to prove what you're exporting meets US food requirements.
Thank you, Carlos.
So Jerson, can I ask you as well, have you considered applying a food safety standard to actually certify, or are you in process of doing that at all right now?
In terms of the standards, that's not necessarily with my agency. I know there has been discussions in terms of applying standards, especially at the post-harvest level. I'm not too sure what other standards can be applied during production, but I know there is discussion about applying a standard at the post-harvest level. I believe there are some voluntary standards, and there are also what is called a CVQ. Probably Mr. Seri or Sarita can correct me on this one. But I know there are some standards being developed at the post-harvest level and not necessarily at the production level. There in terms of the other standards, in terms of packaging, labeling, those are usually determined by the entry conditions for where the product is being sold. So we use those depends on where it's going. But in terms of the actual production and post-harvest, that's where we are currently.
So Sarita, can you speak to that? Are you applying any standards? And so for post-harvest, yes, absolutely. And then in the actual, production of the farming endeavor.
Your mic. Okay, we've developed a production standard. So it's a national vocational qualification together with the Ministry of Education and Industry professionals, and a few farmers have been trained according to the standard, but many farmers have not been trained, and we're seeing how through various projects that we can increase the number of farmers who are trained, but it's really a production standard, not a food safety standard.
Okay, that's great. It's good to know in terms of that. And I guess what is what are those goals of yours? Do you have sort of critical timelines that you're trying to establish some of those over this next, coming year? I know you're obviously talking amongst yourselves about these endeavors and wondering whether you have established any kind of critical timelines for the organization to bring more of this in for yourselves, just so we can understand how far along you are on that.
Is that a question to Vaughan or to Sarita or Justin?
It was for anybody who could answer the question, if and maybe it's for Sarita.
So maybe she may have had to move away from her desk. So it's something that we can list as one of the actions or kind of next steps to discuss after the call. But I think the other question I had, building on what you said, Justin, was just understanding how much is being, oh, I see Sarita's back. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So in terms of the future plan or the future outlook, right now we have about 30 farmers that are trained based on that standard that Vaughan mentioned. We have a few projects, as he said, in the pipeline that are looking towards training additional farmers. And these projects are within a 3-year time frame. So we're expecting maybe, right, and 2 are coming on stream this year. And I think the target would be to get ourselves up to at least 200 farmers being trained. That is the plan. Thanks.
I think one of the things I'd like to point out in this production standard you've developed is that people oftentimes think these standards are all separate plans and activities, but in reality, our goal should be to generate one farm plan that handles all of the environmental, food safety, production practices, and if there are employment issues or housing issues or other human welfare and environmental welfare is in that one standards and operating plan. Just as the Marine Stewardship Council has added environmental and social benefits standards within their program, we should look at a training program for farmers to combine all of this for them. The last thing you want is for a difficult training and teaching situation to end up with 3 different plans they're expected to follow. What we want to end up with is one, and where we can add those things they need to do to improve the product safety, to improve the environmental standards, those kind of things, get them into that same manual and same training and make that our program. Our program at the farm level should be the farm's manual. All the other certifications should be items that are contained in that manual when we train them.
So I'm also just interested to hear, and this is just open to the group, in terms of over the last few years as the CMOS industry has grown, what are some of the benefits you're seeing to the local community? I know at the moment there aren't the benefits in terms of the value based on harvesting the raw materials, but have you seen an exponential benefit in terms of socially as a result, or has there been some challenges based on the rapid growth of the CMOS industry?
What did she say?
Hi. So in terms of the benefits, and I'm sure my colleagues Vaughn and Jason can go to the figures, but in terms of overall benefits, we've seen particularly communities having a greater level of employment because of the CMOS industry. This has really helped employment. It has helped individuals generate income for their families, their households. It's even if it's not the primary form of employment, it has helped to supplement their income as well. And overall, when you speak with the parliamentary rep for the particularly when you're looking at areas like Prale, will definitely attest to how the industry has supported employment and overall well-being of community members, because it's not only an issue of those who are farming, but also individuals who are taking part in the drying process as well. So I think overall, from a social, both a social and economic standpoint, it has a major impact on people's livelihoods. And so any efforts or initiatives that can help grow that, support that, develop that, nurture that even more, so that the individuals can grow their income even further, would be definitely supported. Oh, and I should also mention that it also had a very positive impact when it comes to issues of gender as well, because quite a few of the individuals involved in the CMOS industry are women. So that is also a very positive thing, particularly on the global scale as well. Thanks.
That's great to hear. That's great
Yeah.
to hear. The other question I had was just in terms of equitable working. So the way I was introduced to Craig Henry was through a lady called Vita Wade, who organized something called Aqua Caribbean Blue Economy Conference during 2020. It was a virtual online conference. And part of the conversation was really about how to create equitable collaboration relationships between people from outside the region and also the Caribbean region. So it'd be great to kind of hear, you know, what are some of the best practices from your perspective that should be considered when building collaborative relationships that are mutually beneficial for both sides? And that's a question out to the group.
I think Craig had his hand up earlier, so I'm not sure.
Oh, sorry, I had my hand up before you asked a question. But in terms of what you just said, I think one of the things to think about is really and truly, let's say you have Export St Lucia, of course, who works with a group of farmers and who go through that particular channel to get their you know, they have that brand. But then you do have people who operate on their own. And so it means then that in order for you to capture dealing with equity issues on that is kind of like challenging there, because you do, if especially folks who do it on their own and export on their own, but you also have local suppliers who export, but then also procure from other local producers. So at that level as well. So the industry itself is not so organized that you would understand that there would be challenges both at the local level and of course extra regionally in dealing with, you know, let's just say prices or you know, demands for quality and so on and so forth. But a question that I have, in fact, I have two questions, and that relates to whether or not, when Carlos mentioned just now to have one training program or certification program, whether he's recommending that in terms of, and I'm not sure if we have a food safety standard for CMOSs yet, if there are specific ones that are developed or can be developed and probably integrated into a national certification program. And secondly, while it is that we understand that there's a lot of CMOS that can be produced, one of the issues that I know can creep up is that matter of what the origin of CMOS, where it comes from, because they can come from various sources and of course pass as locally produced CMOS. I know of a couple of examples already people have mentioned. And I know, Zena, you brought up the point, I think you made the point to me some time ago about right now they're asking for certificates of origin for CMOS, if that is the case. So I wonder if you could speak, well, any of you could speak a little bit more on those particular questions. One with regards to food safety standards for CMOS, if that can be developed, that's something that we could aspire to, and as well talking about origin, questions of origin for CMOS.
So we have, I'm just going to state and then Carlos can follow up. We have identified 2 agencies that have a standard through a council so that we can actually apply the food safety standard for CMOS to that. So we have identified that organization already. The 5 principles that you're looking at are some of the elements from that framework that already exists. So I'll let Carlos talk a little bit more about that, but this is what we have identified as something that would work for what we believe would really work for this industry. And then the Marine Council stewardship is actually an oversight that comes in to actually audit based on that. That standard would align to this UK, the global standards, the EU standards, as well as the GFSI standards in the United States. When you have a farming principle like this, the structure with which is in front of you, then and we achieve that from the beginning to the end of the line, then we're able to show in whatever direction you want to go that we have covered those items. So again, a singular vision, a singular framework, bringing us into a certification of the food safety standards. So yes, go ahead, Carlos, you can go from there.
Yeah, as Adrienne was saying, is we've identified sources to put the standard together. What you won't find in the marketplace right now is a GFSI or even probably a GMP standard that specifically addresses that issue because it's fairly new. Industry organizations like this Marine Stewardship Council, they've got far more information on that, and we would work with them to produce it. You aren't required to be certified to some international standard. You're required to basically meet the requirements of the importing country. So in some cases, we'll be traversing new ground and saying, this is the standard for our growers group, or this is the standard that our country wants us to go by. As you probably know, being involved in agencies and governments yourself, quite often the actual regulations or standards are written from the outside and then proposed to the local regulatory body to approve. So we'll probably take that approach, saying this is what we should be doing, put that into our plan, and then asking whoever we're going to work with on things like certificates of origin. So certificates of origin are not an internationally regulated item. It's a Chamber of Commerce issue. So we just need to determine, does the exporting island or the group want to issue those and have control over it? Does St. Lucia have an export origin program that you could comply with, or are we going to develop an export certificate of origin ourselves and register it with something like the International Chamber of Commerce and say, this is what we're going to use? So some of this will be new ground where we create it. We don't go out and seek approval. We say, this is what we're going to do, and then we seek approval. We don't go out and ask what we should do.
And again, what Carlos is saying in terms of the one vision, right, and the exporting countries. So if your aim is to go both EU and US, then we make sure that all of the food safety principles would hit those line items. So we would combine that standard. But the standard that we did find from a growing perspective has all of those elements laid out from a food safety angle, from the beginning, from the full chain and vertical.
Okay, thanks.
So we're coming up to the last part of the discussion. So Adrienne, do you want to talk through, or Carlos, Adrienne and Carlos, would you like to talk through kind of the structure that we've identified based on the journey that we shared at the beginning and the reason why we started out on this journey, ultimately to get CMOS goods at a high standard in alignment with compliance and sustainability in a way that would benefit everybody in the ecosystem in the stores. And so ASC essentially, because this is their expertise, have a methodology in order to do that.
So in order to move through to get to the CPG, so I just want to sort of take a step back, and Zena and Carlos and I came together and we were just helping her with her actual packaged good. She's like, I want to develop one product, but my raw material supply chain I can see is having problems. We There are FDA holds, there are some concerns on heavy metals, there's some concerns on food safety. So Zena read us her mission statement for her brand, and it was very powerful. And part of that mission statement was a declaration to create the most sustainable supply, or at least buy from the most sustainable supply. So I think the real ask in the discussion here is for how can we as organizations come together to understand what you've already done and help to support the endeavor in the ways that you want it to go. So how can we be of assistance in realizing your vision for both your communities, your people, and your organization? How can we help support that so that we can continue to also move toward a more sustainable CPG? There are people that are out there, and we've talked to many who are still having a hard time trying to find it. The FDA and the USDA are both, there's a lot of confusion about where it actually lives. Is it seafood HACCP? Is it actual, how is aqua farming and aquaculture regulated? And so in this gray area, which we find ourselves a lot in the natural food industry, I have to say, we are going to seize the opportunity to sort of clarify things, or at least support. So our organization is one that works with a lot of the regulatory bodies to have some understanding. And so we have a lot of support from both the microbiological, physiochemical leaders in the United States specifically, who can support this endeavor through FDA and understanding. But realistically, collectively at the farm level, we do have to have a unified vision about how these practices are practiced universally. And how they're going to be spoken about, and so that's what we see. And you're educating me a lot right now by telling me what you have already done. This is a great exploratory call to tell me the hurdles you've already climbed. And I guess what I'm trying to understand is the pain that you still have, and how we can perhaps address that pain and move together, collectively. So this chart right here is really about how are we going to move through understanding the discovery of what you have, and this is where we're really at. How are you already developing the facility standard protocols? Do we need to support and assist in that to align to a collective goal on which standard we're going to go after? When wholesale manufacturing people start, like Health Aid, I've been with them since the very beginning. You may or may not be familiar with the kombucha brand, but they went from, when I first met them, they were $150,000 brand, and they grew to 100 million. And as they were growing, and I was involved in their growth, and Carlos and I were involved in their growth, and at every level, we were consistently asking, what standard do we want to go through through food safety? And what growing organizations have had to face, and with strategic system support through consultants or through their own personnel, they're able to understand that this is not just a one person, one department called quality and food safety that manages the growth of these brands. It is a collective organizational approach to food safety that's integrated from every aspect. So because the standards cover that, again, from an operational standpoint, raw material supply chain, from a preventive maintenance standpoint to how we're going to maintain the machines, to a harvest standpoint and how we're going to actually understand the best ways and best practices for harvesting, to what equipment we're using. So it really involves every single person from the organization. And I think that's been some of the great learnings and obviously challenges, but great satisfaction when we're able to really work together with an entire team that is multidisciplinary to come together and realize the vision of a safe product through everybody's efforts through their own lens. So quality is not controlled by one universal, person or group. It's really throughout the organization. And how do we do that? So the first thing that we do is really align to the principles of what we're trying to achieve. What standard do we want to follow? Where do we want to go? And I'm speaking in the we just because that's how I approach every project that we have. It is really a we. This is a collective coming together to share and to help to implement. And the implementation part, I believe, as you probably well understand, and you can probably teach us some things about that, is it's a very challenging. And so I think that the discovery part is where we begin. We understand how best to support your vision and collective vision of perhaps how we could come together to support each other. And then working with understanding the continuity of certifications and the standards that we're going for. We have identified a standard that would work for this, that we can actually elevate this food safety standard up to FDA and get their eyes on it and create an actual beginning of creating less grayness in this CMOS industry. That's what I do believe. So the next step would be auditing, right? How are we collective farming? How are we again, Jerson, as you've already said, you have many of these things already created. So we're not here to recreate the wheel. We're just here to say, how does it apply to the standards so that there's all green lights? That's what I call it. So you're not looking behind you, you're looking in front of you, right? Where do you want to go? How do you want to get there? And how can we as an organization be streamlined across everybody? And then we work on the strategic implementation of that. So we are understanding that this is supply chain assurance. This is for raw material supply to make sure that we're mitigating risk by following the standards, and we mitigate the risk of non-compliance at very valuable and very important pinch points, which is the importing all across the world. And then obviously assurance, and in the strategic implementation contains all of the work in the food safety realm and training, assessing the microbiological, understanding how we're going to get to a certificate of analysis of every lot, which is required across the world now for GFSI level schemes in both the UK as well as the United States. So that would be where a lot of that work is going. How are we looking at traceability? And we've built traceability programs, very simple ones. In fact, as a health aid, and I'm just giving them as an example, but as health aid grew, we had to come up with different principles for how they were going to actually look at their product, where it's going. And Carlos, because he's very well-trained in this area too, was able to develop low-cost solutions for them to look at traceability that didn't require an enterprise organization that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. So ASC's growing with the company. It really is supporting the endeavors from an efficient standpoint as well. And then how are we making sure that assurance that the quality assurance part is, and for the consumer packaged goods, if you're interested in moving into a consumer packaged goods, then how do we talk about that together? But it is about sustainability of the actual program within your, within the organization. What is the program? How are we working the program? How are we training the program? How are we sustaining the program?
Thank you, Adrienne. Sarita?
Thanks so much, Adrienne. So from everything we've discussed so far, what's again coming up in my mind is that here's an opportunity for our farmers in St. Lucia to benefit from an additional market. Not necessarily from a country perspective, but from a business who's interested in purchasing CMOS. And that's Humble-Wise, right? And my understanding is, hey, we want to purchase, but we need to ensure that the raw material production meets certain standards, which would be in line with our brand, but also in line with the requirements for export. And then we have the other aspect of where are the gaps in terms of where are we now in St. Lucia and vis-a-vis what is required. And the third one would be, how do we address those gaps? So I'm just thinking, and again, Export St. Lucia, Vaughan can come in, but I'm thinking it would be really good. I mean, I know we've kind of discussed overarchingly kind of, what is needed, etc., in terms of quality assurance, traceability, etc. I think I think most of us are familiar with that. Actually, that was the first time I saw the Stewardship Council for Aquaculture. I'm familiar with the marine, not the aquaculture one, so that was a learning point. But it would be interesting for just to have sort of a clear checklist or snapshot of what is needed, so we could assess what is currently in place, see where we may need to make various adjustments, because we have a few, as I said, we have a few aquaculture projects on stream online, and if this is an opportunity we can benefit from, then it could be an opportunity for us to rescope some of those projects to meet some of these requirements. So, I mean, that's just from broadly thinking, but certainly we can get more in the details. But I think based on what's presented, I'm seeing that as the overarching need. How do we bridge the gap from where we are at to where we need to be to benefit from this opportunity? Thanks.
Thank you, Sarita. I mean, to Adrienne's earlier point, the purpose of this call was exploratory. We didn't know what we didn't know. And we've learned a lot in terms of hearing kind of the current state in terms of where you were at in the industry and where those gaps are. So this call will provide us with that first step in terms of assessing kind of what we could do next and how we could potentially collaborate going forward. Just wanted to respond to your point around humble, kind, wise, is that yes, it started with us trying to secure our own supply chain, but the reality of it is this problem's not going to just affect us. This is going to affect every single CMOS business or business that's reliant on CMOS. And so, from our perspective, we feel the market's big enough to not worry about competition. Our thing is just to be distinctive and to deliver the best service we can to our group of consumers. But at the same time, we believe by doing this opens up the opportunity for smaller entrepreneurs who wouldn't necessarily have access to this information and have the ability to capacity build and build the capabilities without somebody opening the door in this way. So there's two kind of components to this project from our perspective. Craig and I had also talked about this idea of a Caribbean CMOS Summit, where we were able to bring people with knowledge across the supply chain of the CMOS industry to be able to share that knowledge and start to do some of that capacity building in order to do that. So what started, to Adrienne's point, was us just wanting to get something on the shelves, then really just kind of spoke to the fact that this is where, I originate from, the Caribbean region, and we can't be successful if the region that we are sourcing from, that I have an affinity to, can't benefit from it too. So that really was part of the driving force. So Adrienne, just.
Yeah, I think also too, I would love the opportunity to talk one-on-one to Jerson or anyone who on this call, so that you could share kind of more where you actually are at. And if you have anything of what you've done, and if you're interested in collaborating and showing us, kind of where you're at, so that I could better understand how to maybe be of service and of support. Certainly, the standards are the standards, so they are out there. And so that what we did was spend some time looking at the standards and knowing how we could apply that. And I guess our core capability is how to do it, and with the efficiency and speed with which we could support the project to do it. That's what we're sort of talking about as well. But I'm not sure, if anybody's interested in having a one-on-one with us after this call to sort of talk about that and what that might look like.
Well, I would definitely be interested in speaking to you further. I don't think it can be immediately after the call because I have another
Oh, no,
meeting.
of course. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean today.
Yes. Yes, but definitely we could schedule something if that's okay.
Sure.
I would also be interested, Lynch Faye from the OECS Commission, because I mentioned earlier that we are looking at probably doing an assessment of the CMOS value chain and looking at doing some intervention in the area. So I wouldn't mind having a further conversation on that with you.
Sure, that would be great. We can work on putting that together then.
I just wanted to add, I just wanted to add as well, I'm thinking that one agency that may not have been represented here, but could really benefit from the dialogue is the St Lucia Bureau of Standards.
Correct.
Well. Yeah.
Right.
And Hannah was on the call, but she had to leave for another meeting. And she did mention that she heads the unit that is responsible for issuing sort of the quality certificates for importation into the US. And if I noted correctly in your presentation, there were certain requirements for microbial testing, and St. Lucia has been equipped with a national diagnostic facility, and she uses that lab for testing, etc. So I think it will be critical to have her in that dialogue as we speak about quality assurance matters as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarita.
So the one thing I wanted to kind of contribute here is to, I feel good about everything that we've shared here, and I don't want to, Zena's gone to a lot of work to collect a really diverse pool of experts and information. And I thought if we could, I know we don't have an organization because we're all busy with our own organizations, but if we could at least form this into a working group by finding out from those who were able to participate, in what way do they want to continue forward? And that includes personal conversations about some of these specific issues, but maybe just Zena, I don't know if Zena, are you still here?
Yeah, I'm here.
So either Zena or our company, we organize who's attended today into an ongoing group who want to continue moving forward, basically with some structures so that we know how we can do assessments, where we can collect information. And my thought was basically that we would have people get back to us at the end of this today with their contact information and what role they'd like to play. And the three basic roles I see in a working group are really leaders, people who are going to have to or want to actually do approvals and or implementation of the combined information we put together. So I'm thinking of those of you who are doing training programs in the field or managing those, you probably want a leadership role where you're shaping what the final outcome is. Those that want to participate actually either receive information on a regular basis, have an opinion on it, or provide it so they can all get included. And those who have maybe a downstream interest in it, but don't have the time or the resources to engage fully, we can just put you on a follow list, and then we can form a mailing list and a working group that is just electronic for now, and maybe with follow-up calls where needed. But basically get this organized into, from everyone that's listened to us today, everyone that's participated, who would like to move forward. And Zena, since you already have everyone's email, do you want to go ahead and coordinate organizing it as to what participants are going to be in the working group from this call?
Yeah, so just I know we've got a few minutes left, and I just want to give Craig an opportunity to sort of close out the session. So I think that's a great idea. And Craig Henry, the CEO of St Lucia Conservation Fund, sort of brought everybody together on this call. So if we did do something, I would want to make sure that that was kind of facilitated through that channel, and just make sure whatever made sense for us to do was endorsed by St Lucia Conservation Fund.
Hi everyone. Just let me say that I'm happy that the conversation proceeded the way that it has, and I'm very encouraged by fact, the willingness of participants to have follow-up conversations. In fact, Carlos, you took the words right out of my mouth, because at the end of the day, given the flow of the conversation and what needs to happen, having something sort of like a working group is would be appropriate at this point in time, given that there still needs to be some exchanges with regards to what exists and what can be done and what direction this wants to take. The Conservation Fund is committed to supporting CMOS development in St. Lucia. Like I tell you, we will facilitate however we can, conversations, meeting, organizing something, and just to highlight the fact that it is a very important sector, noting the potentials for not just the community, but also but the issue that may arise in terms of how CMOS is produced in St. Lucia and who can benefit from it. I always have that fear that, yes, we're seeing many of these CMOS farms all over the place, but then, what's happening to those folks, who are actually producing the CMOS, what's going on with the environment, who are the suppliers, are they safe suppliers, if I want to, buyers, and how can we match this so that people can really benefit from the true market that is really out there? We know what can happen. And I'm glad, Zena, that you took the time to explain, move from your particular personal interest, but understand the wider context of how we, what's at stake here. So yes, I would agree, and I would encourage for us to form such a working group. And of course, those of you who need to have the separate conversations can go ahead and do that, but just let us ensure that, the conversations, at least there is some kind of feedback to the wider group. In this group, I'll keep it small, always, like today's group, essentially. And thanks, Sarita, for bringing up, yes, Bureau of Standards will need to be involved because, of the various ways that they influence and participate in how we establish and approve standards in St. Lucia, especially for goods that are imported and exported. So I would like to thank you, Zena, personally, Adrienne, and Carlos, and of course, Kofi. That, Kofi, I need to invite you to another conversation, in fact, all of you, especially with regards to carbon credits, because we are also, nationally, the government is looking to move it into voluntary carbon credits market program. We ourselves at the Conservation Fund, we're trying to develop our carbon offset project, but then that is a complicated thing, getting to know, and so, again, worthy of other conversations. So thank you, thanks for the introductions, thanks for the participants to also really stayed for these 2 hours, Zena. We didn't anticipate, but yes. So thanks and have a good evening, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody. Have a great day.
Have a great day.
Great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.